Well, this sounds like a made-up story. One man rigging state elections to help his boss, President George Bush. After it's done, power players in Washington say, get rid of the guy. 45-year-old Michael Connell died Friday night after his plane crashed into this vacant house near Union Township in Stark County. Connell was a political power player in Washington, D.C., and in the White House.
He actually had to cancel 2 of his previous flights in the past few months alone because of some kind of problems or because there was some suspicion that there was something wrong with the plane. Mike Connell could have disclosed information that would have been absolutely detrimental to the Bush administration, in particular Karl Rove.
In 2004, in Ohio, Mike Connell built the Secretary of State, J. Kenneth Blackwell's election night reporting system. He had been the one who had created the firewall in Congress for the Judiciary Committee. He had created the email system for the White House, the infamous email system for the White House, where millions and millions of emails had just disappeared somehow.
He was vehemently anti-abortion. I think that a lack of scruples required to manipulate votes and to set up secret email servers and things like that, somewhat mitigated by this ideological passion to save the babies.
Apparently, Connell was a real believer and really did believe in the Republican Party because he was a strict Catholic, and he thought that he was saving the children, saving the babies.
He was a true ideologue and not just a power junkie.
Stephen Spoonamore investigates bank fraud and computer fraud. He has looked at what happened in Ohio.
I do not believe George Bush won. I believe Kerry won, and I'm a member of the GOP.
It is his belief that what happened in Ohio was a man-in-the-middle attack, that the numbers that were reported on the website, frankly, have nothing to do with the actual way that people voted.
The kingpin, I thought, was probably sitting somewhere in the middle on the high-speed line. And the kingpin is a computer with a person sitting at it that doesn't just steal the information and then they use it later like we saw. It's a person who has on board their kingpin computer the code and instructions for the Secretary of State's office and the code and instructions for a county tabulator. Instead of this happening, this happens. So at 9 o'clock in the evening, Kerry's leading in Ohio. And the kingpin is watching these results go through, and this operator is sitting here at a company called Smart Tech Solutions. We now know
this office had a backup system, election night reporting system with Smart Tech.
And remember, when I speculated this, everyone said, that's ridiculous, that's completely impossible. Well, we now found out that not only was I right, we know where it was sent. We didn't just have it introduced, it was designed into the Secretary of State's office that they could switch the control from their computer talking to the counties to have a Smart Tech do it. And then we found out who owned it, and then we also found out it's also doing Karl Rove's email. Like, that's brilliant.
And he has talked to Mike Connell, the guy who actually created this system that was used to report the results on election night in 2004 in Ohio.
I know Mike, and I like Mike. Mike and I share a lot of values.
He knew Connell personally and outed him, named him.
So he was subpoenaed for a deposition in this election fraud case. Once the subpoena became public, Mike Connell began to fight the subpoena.
We received an anonymous tip that Rove had threatened Mike Connell.
He was, in fact, sitting for his deposition on the Monday before the 2008 presidential election.
At times, Mike would look to his lawyer when he really didn't want to answer a question. He was looking at him to, to raise an objection. I asked the question of what role he had in Smart Tech being part of the Secretary of State's computer system for election night in Ohio 2004. And his initial response was that, well, I don't recall that I did anything to influence that. And then I asked him the question, what subcontractors did you have under your contract with the Secretary of State's office? And at that point he said, oh, I I may have had Smart Tech as a subcontract under my contract.
During one of the breaks, I had the opportunity to talk to him, and I warned him not to fly his plane. His response was to, kind of scoff and roll his eyes, and he mainly was kind of looking out the window in the law office we were in, looking at Cleveland, and I talked a little about his family, but mainly he talked about, how busy he was, and what an imposition it was to be brought in for a deposition.
Here comes Santa Claus, right down Santa Claus Lane. Vixen and Blixen and all his reindeers pulling on the reins. Bells are ringing, children singing, all is merry and bright. So hang your stockings and say your prayers, 'cause Santa Claus comes tonight.
In December, just prior to Christmas 2008, Mike Connell, who had been an accomplished private pilot, was on his way back from a meeting in DC back to Ohio, where he lived, for his company's annual Christmas party. Mike Connell never made it to that Christmas party.
We had a single engine, 4-occupant plane crashed here in this residence. We have a single occupant that has been deceased.
You can hear the engines cutting on and off, cutting out, and then you heard a big bang.
A lot of folks have shouted conspiracy theory that his plane was sabotaged, and in fact, in the weeks leading up to that crash, there were signs that he had been warned, that he had been threatened, perhaps by Karl Rove himself, that he, Mike Connell, should take the fall for what happened in 2004 in Ohio.
There was a lot of question about the Karl Rove's relationship both to him and to his untimely death.
There are quite a bit of oddities that have to do with his crash.
Protocol is that you rope off the crash site and post a watch, essentially, and you conduct the investigation during the daylight. And that wasn't done. They brought in lights, they removed the plane, everything was done in 2 hours. They were in and out, and the plane is gone. As much of the parts of Connell that they could find easily under the lights, those were taken away as well. But again, his wife came out the next day and found bits of him lying around. That's pretty unorthodox, I think, for federal crash investigations.
His sister believes that it was, in fact, murder. His wife now seems to believe something very strange went on. She was able to get his backpack back, which had everything in it except the BlackBerry, which she says he used to take everywhere. Was it murder? At this point, we don't know.
Stephen Spoonamore had said to me long before that deposition, Cliff, you realize the people we're dealing with whack people.
In September 2009, investigators received an anonymous letter with a tip that Mike Connell's plane had been sabotaged, along with a redacted report detailing the operation in military shorthand. Mike Connell was described as NST, a national security threat. The return address did not exist, and the name on the letter was Mark Felt, the man known as Deep Throat, who had died a year before.
We can't really prevent them from trying to steal an election, but we can prepare people for that happening so that when and if it does happen, they won't simply keel over and feel defeated and like crawling home to die.